Hey everyone, welcome. Today we're going to be, we have a special guest here and we're going to be covering everything lab related. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be nothing like you've ever heard before. This is cutting edge science, up to date information that you will not hear anywhere else related to your hormones and how we can use labs to help us be detectives in figuring out root causes of our hormonal imbalance. So, are you a woman experiencing any of the symptoms related through going through one of the biggest transitions in our lifetime? That's perimenopause or menopause. And they could be anything from having brain fog, joint pains, hot flashes, night sweating in the middle of a night that keeps you up, or like I said, hot flashes during the day that gets you exhausted, and then you're not able to sleep because of the night sweating, and it's a perpetual cycle. And not to mention anxiety, depression, perhaps hair loss. I experienced that a few years ago. That's where how my journey actually started in helping women balance their hormones. I'll tell you a little bit about that later. But, other symptoms may be, like I said, anxiety, joint pain, not being able to be as mobile. And the biggest one I hear all the time is lack of energy and not being as productive as one wishes to be. So if you're experiencing any of that, you may be encountering hormonal imbalance. It's very likely because of the stage of our life and what is happening in our bodies chemistry wise. And so I have a very, very special guest here with me. He is none other than my brother, Dr. Robert Gellibolian. He is like, I call him the brain because he really is the brain. He's very brilliant. He's just genius, like literally genius. I'm very grateful to surround myself with people who are just geniuses in their rights in their field. And here's one of them. And he is also actually, I don't know if I've mentioned this, he's also on my advisory board. And I'm very, very happy to have my brother because he knows his stuff when it comes to many things, but especially about biochemistry and when it comes to hormones. I mean, I'll share with you his background, but really to not do disservice, I'm going to have him explain where his journey has taken him. It's quite impressive. Basically, he's a biochemist. He's worked in different institutes and he's gained a lot of expertise and knowledge. He knows about the biochemistry of the body, about the hormones, about biomarkers. But what I'd like to do is, before we start this segment, which, by the way, this segment's going to be about labs and what kind of lab options we have and what you typically encounter when you go to a doctor, and even if it's functional doctor, and what you can be asking for. And that's what the segment is going to be about. But for now, I want Dr. Roberts to share with us his journey and where he's come from and how he's an expert in the field of hormones and helping us women figure out this hormone playground. Is that okay?
Sure, of course. Thank you for having me, Caroline. Happy to be on the board of advisors.
Thank you.
Happy to help in any way, whichever way I can. So, as Caroline mentioned, I'm a biochemist by training. I did my PhD in biochemistry and biophysics with specific emphasis on DNA structure and function. The lab I did my PhD is well known in that field. So we paved the path for specific microsatellite DNA instabilities. We charted the path for that now it's becoming clinically relevant at that time. My PhD advisor did his PhD. His advisor was the guy that won the Nobel Prize for cracking the genetic code.
Oof.
So we have a little bit of legacy in that regard in terms of genetics and DNA. But that path basically took me to the Salk Institute, where I did my postdoctoral fellowship in the gene expression laboratory. We're looking at oncology and biomarkers of oncology and how DNA instability and how DNA becomes unstable and actually propagates into how some forms of cancer, how mutations propagate in some forms of cancer. There we got to collaborate with a foremost lab in nuclear hormone receptors, Dr. Ron Evans' lab, which is a powerhouse of nuclear hormones. They discovered the glucocorticoid receptors. When you're talking about steroids, he's the guy. So the vitamin D receptor function, things of that sort, a lot of it was charted in that lab. So we got to collaborate in different aspects of how gene expression in oncology and nuclear hormones sort of play a part, how breast cancer propagates, how hormones play a role, and a myriad of different kind of factors. And it's complex in its own right, and hormones are very much the last frontier to be discovered in science for now, outside of neurology, cardiology. That's been known for some time. Endocrine function has been the last one to be discovered, and we're learning more and more every day. So when Caroline talked about going into hormones for women and the holistic approach to hormone, we definitely decided to sort of bring a little bit of evidence base into how you actually weave that function in to make things work, and what labs particularly should people be interested in. So I started for some brief period of time, I did some consultation, health consultation for people. I don't do that anymore because of the complexities involved. But I think now I collaborate with very selective folks like Caroline that actually have a program that they're putting out there that is evidence-based, data-driven, and how you as the person that's buying into that program can benefit. So it's a multifaceted approach. It involves your involvement, and it involves her involvement, and a myriad of other kind of professionals to get that journey going. So from the Salk, that took me to Silicon Valley, the hotbed of VCs and startups, and I started basically working at Agilent Technologies, an offset of Hewlett Packard, where they were really on the cutting edge of, people think about Hewlett Packard being a computer company. Well, the offset, Agilent, was pushing to find out how we can foray into health. So we were actually bringing experts like myself. They hired us to basically bring our DNA expertise into play. And how do you use the printers of Hewlett Packard to print DNA onto large surfaces so you can actually interrogate millions of genes at the same time? So this technology kind of sort of became the basis of what you're starting to see in direct-to-consumer genetics today, some aspects of it. So it really became a very, very hot thing to do in the 2000s. And after that, I got involved in nonprofit institutes. I was driving their technology development, particularly in hearing research, epigenetics, and what have you and whatnot. We got to collaborate with one of the fathers of epigenetics here at the City of Hope, where he was actually the one that cloned the insulin gene, so that now you're seeing a lot of news about, how they're hiking up the prices. But their basic method was, okay, let's clone this gene, let's produce it so people can have access to it. So there's a lot of good science being done for a good purpose. So it's not everything about money and money and money. So things get muddied up along the way. So also this guy was the one that discovered how the X chromosome in women gets inactivated, because women have two X chromosomes, but they have to choose during embryogenesis. One of them has to be inactive, especially particularly in males, right? You have an X and a Y. So which X gets chosen to be inactivated? How does the cell decide which one to do? That's a complete epigenetic mechanism of reprogramming how the cell basically decides based on series of events. Again, a very complex phenomenon that goes on. So I got exposed to various different things throughout my life, particularly at the Salk with the nuclear hormones, oncology. So when I'm seeing people, whether it be in the functional realm or in the conventional realm of endocrinology, really sort of uh, dabble at the surface of hormones. People are talking about ratio of hormones are important. You know, I have estrogen dominance, yada, yada, yada. My estrogen is gazillion. My progesterone
Right.
is a bazillion. I start really laughing. I'm like, looking, you're really scratching at the surface. The ratio is important, but the absolute levels are also important. People are married to saliva tests. People are married to urine tests. People are married to blood tests. Which one's right?
So let's talk about
So,
that.
yeah.
So yes. So for most of us, that went over our heads, right?
Me too.
That's why I have him explain where he came from, because it's incredible that his journey, what he's done, and how he's gained the experience and expertise, and what makes him the expert, and why I am so grateful to have him on the team. And so
Well, I'm no expert in any ways, but
none of us are.
I know
That's the
some
thing.
things, but
Yes.
not everything.
I love you being humble. Thank you so much. And that's what it is all about. You know, we don't know it all. And we're going to share with you the information that you need to know so that you can take charge of your health. So I wanted to, in this segment, talk about labs. You talked about the different kind of labs. You talked about there's urine, there's blood, there's saliva. May I share with you my experience
Mhm.
of how I just went through this rabbit hole? A few years ago, like many women, I found myself feeling very exhausted, very tired. I was experiencing night sweating at night, and I was losing a lot of hair, massive amounts of hair. And I was burning both ends of the candle, and I could not stop. I was taking care of many people, including my father, and then my father-in-law going through cancer. There was a lot on my plate, and I just wanted to take care of it, like nip it in the bud. And I went to a holistic OBGYN, and she asked if I could, it would benefit if I had a hormone panel done. And not knowing what I know now, I said, sure. So right away, she had a blood test run, and the results came back, and she recommended a bioidentical hormone cream for me. And I was really hesitant because I just like to do pretty much, if my ancestors did not do it, I just think, you know, how did they deal with it, right? But I didn't know enough, and I knew there were a lot of experts out there who really praised bioidentical hormones. And my doctor at that time had told me that it's very benign. It's identical to your hormones, hence bioidentical hormones, and it's compounded specific to exactly what you need. And then, so hesitantly, I said yes, as long as it's like minute dose. If you make that whatever it is in a minute dose. So off I went, got my prescription. Second day into taking the cream, I was thousands of miles away. I was in Sardinia.
Oh, I remember this. Yeah.
Mm. I downplayed that day. It was like, looking back, you know how you have like moments of like, you look back, you're like, holy cow.
Yeah, you called me. You were saying you were dying.
Yes, it's exactly how I felt, like I was dying. I woke up 5 a.m. with intense sweating, like it was elevating, escalating, and the pain, shooting pain in my down below my belt. It was just unbearable. And I have 3 kids. I never experienced a labor pain so painful like this pain. I could not open my mouth. I could not talk. I could not move. I was curled up. And in those moments, it only lasted 2 hours, but I literally thought I was dying. And in those moments that I was curled up, visions of all the women who'd come to me asking me for help, for the hormonal imbalance. And when I told them it was completely honest. I said, I don't know anything about hormones. I don't know how to help you. I don't know whether you should take bioidentical hormones, whether you should, I have no idea where to start, right? So I could not help them, but I remember hearing their pain, hearing about all their suffering. It felt like it came to me intensely, like I was feeling every woman's pain. And 2 hours later, it stopped. But the sheets were wet. The mattress was wet. I could not believe what happened. And I called my brother and we figured, I knew it was the cream because there was nothing else. And he came down hard on me, thinking I took that on by myself. And I said, no, I went to a doctor and she prescribed it. And then he started asking me questions like, what kind of test was run? And I said, blood test. And so I started, well, the other second advice he gave me was, don't do that. I'm like, okay, great. How do I?
Now I've done it.
Yeah. No, I'm like, okay, I won't do that. But how do I get rid of this night sweatings and losing my hair? I mean, it feels like I'm losing my femininity and my vitality, and I can't have that. And he told me the advice that I keep giving women. He said, go down to the basics and do what you preach. And I thought at that time, but I don't have time for that. I want a quick fix. But I knew that I could not do a quick fix. And that was such a blessing in disguise to almost die from that experience, because had I not, I think it would have been a slow death, literally a slow death. So that just made me realize that I don't want to touch that. So I went back to research mode. I went to hyper research mode. I interrogated you. You remember how many times I came to you asking you, okay, what kind of test should I take? If not blood test, how about this saliva test that others are talking about or just praising about? And then there's this urine test. Oh my God, how about this urine test? And then I was also talking to a couple of other experts in the field who are very, very functional. And I was comparing notes and it was just very frustrating. And I remember what you told me, but I'm not going to share that until the second segment because I think it's really important.
I don't even know what.
I know,
Okay,
I can tell.
I can't wait now.
um, and so I know. You want to close the blinds because the lights is like really hitting your face better. So I'll share that with you in the second segment. But today I want Robert to explain about the difference between the different kinds of lab tests and what they pick up and what the biomarkers are, why we're looking for certain things. And then I'll share with you what we're going to be talking about the second segment so that you can stay tuned, because this is a big topic. We could be talking about this. That's what exactly we did for months, going back, this in my head, going back and forth to finally realize what I realized, which is going to be revealed in the second segment. But anyways, if you're curious to know what happened, what I did is that I went back to basics. It was interesting that I was in Sardinia. This is one of the blue zones. Blue zones are special zones around the world. There's only 4 of them that house the most centenarians. Centenarians are people who live over 100 with longevity, with vitality. We're talking about being able to dance and socialize, have a healthy lifestyle, including healthy sex life, in the 90s. Hello. Like, that is such an amazing thing to do. Like, who wants to live for a long time and not be able to enjoy life? I want to be able to enjoy life in my olden days, right? So these are people who are demonstrating longevity. So here I am in Sardinia, almost dying. And it was a great opportunity. It was like a gift that was gifted to me. And I went to interviewing the centenarian women, asking them what it is that they experienced when they were going through menopause. And interestingly, what I found out is that that word, menopause, perimenopause, or whatever, they did not know what that was. Not because they're so behind in the science or technology, but because they don't experience it. They don't know what that is because they don't know what we're talking about. The modern woman experiences all these symptoms, the hot flashes, night sweating, and brain fog and all that. They don't know what that is. They think hot sweat is something you experience in a hot summer day. They don't they didn't understand it's like the blood boiling from inside out, right? And I interviewed the younger generation, and I found the same thing. They did not experience menopause, but the younger generation, people less than 70 years of age, they went through experiencing that. So I discovered so many things. I was trying to put the puzzle together, pieces together, and it's just beautiful. So it just was a reinforcement and reaffirmation of how lifestyle has a huge impact on every part of us, every part of our bodies, including hormones that play a huge part on so many parts of our bodies, mechanisms, processes, cells, and organs, everything. So, but it's really important to find out where the symptomology is really, I think, gives us a really big clue of women's symptoms, like what they're feeling. However, like you said very beautifully, symptoms alone is not enough, because a lot of times biochemistry happens way before we feel symptoms,
Yeah.
right? So that's where it's really important to work with technology. Technology in this case can come in handy, right? In a lot of ways in our modern lifestyle, technology has played a negative role in that it's disconnected us from ancient wisdom, right? But we can use technology to our benefit. And let's just get down to it, because I'm sure the audience is very curious. Uh, I'm guessing a lot of you guys have gone through many doctors, chased after one doctor after another,
Mhm.
done many lab tests. Maybe, the lab test came in fine, saying everything's fine, but you're not feeling fine. Or the lab tests show one thing one time and another time, and you're trying to figure out what is happening. And Dr. Robert's going to explain how hormones are really a moving target, because they're constantly changing, especially in a woman's body, and different lifetimes in our lifetimes, and how to use labs and technology to hit the target, to use that with the right practitioner, right? Because it also matters who you use as a practitioner. You want to have a sharp shooter shooting at the target. Most of us, how it is done, including the experience that I had going to a holistic functional doctor, it was more of a miss than it hit. It's a shooting game where it's a hit or miss, but most of the time it's a miss. So today we're going to talk about how to do it so it's a hit.
Very important points. First and foremost, you talked about hitting the target. There's no target to hit. You can't hit the target.
Mm.
Hormones are such a broad impacting thing. None of us, including the latest science, know exactly how to hone in. This is not like a cholesterol test you take that your HDL is this and your LDL is that. Therefore, your risk factor and such is here. We're not there with hormones at all. And
Wow.
we may not get there for another decade or two. What we can do is hit near the vicinity of the target. So how broad that zip code becomes, and most docs, whether functional or conventional, they really operate differently. I don't know. I'm driven by different covenant and buzzwords. So I like hitting the zip code and honing in on a target. You'll never hit that target, but the closer you get, the better you can handle, the better you have a handle on the symptoms, the better you have a handle on what's going on, maybe going on biochemically. And really, at the end of the day, it's not really about hormones. Nobody gives a rat's cahoot about the hormones because they're not really what drives the equation. They're the receptors they bind to. They're the ones that actually make all the actions happen. So when you get into the nitty-gritty science, which we're not going to do, you'll understand how there's many hundreds of cofactors that are involved in that one nuclear hormone receptor, whether it's estrogen you're talking about or progesterone. There's so many things that come together and they culminate around certain genes, thousands of genes, that make certain genes express and certain genes turn off. We just can't get into that here. And frankly, we really don't understand. And there is no test out there that actually measures that. Unless you're a laboratory rat that we can kill at the end of the day and sort of find out, which I'm pretty sure none of you are going to be, subjecting yourself to do something like that.
Yeah, what did you tell me? This is what I was going to share in the second segment, but I guess we're going to share right now. Is remember I came to you, until I get an answer and it feels good in my heart, I'll keep asking. I'm like an interrogator, a sweet interrogator. And I kept asking, I'm like, okay, then what test?
And you kept nagging and nagging and
yeah,
nagging.
yeah.
Like, okay, which is
yeah. And the answer was, unless you become a lab rat and you do a biopsy of each and every organ in your body. And even then, it's still a moving target. So, but like you said, let's just understand it so we can hone in as much as we can and utilize the technology to help us figure out the steps to take. Right?
So there's, so when you talk about lab tests, there are different samples that you can use. The three different common samples that are used are the salivas, spit, their blood, serum or whatever, plasma or serum, usually coming from blood, and urine. So they each have pros and cons. People talk about they get married, this Dutch test or this urine test is the most accurate out there in the industry. There's different kinds of accuracies. There's diagnostic accuracy, there's clinical accuracy. So just because something has high diagnostic accuracy doesn't mean it has clinical prognostic value. Saliva is one of them. There's very highly, accurate tests for saliva. They can measure hormones down to 1 molecule per milliliter of sample easily. That's very accurate. But it has virtually zero clinical relevance.
Wow. Why is that?
Unless you have Addison's or Cushing's disease that they're looking at your free cortisol, if you're looking at estradiol, progesterone, testosterone tests in saliva, you might as well throw your money out. That's a good steak dinner that you've just thrown out. So far as science can figure out. The reason for that is saliva is an ultrafiltrate of blood. So it only shows whatever's getting filtrated through the glands of saliva, through the blood, the capillaries that feed into it. And the bound stuff doesn't even come through. It's like having a filter, like a HEPA filter that takes particles of whatever and sticks to it, and you're measuring what's coming out. So if you're measuring what's coming out as pure air, that's great. But if you want to know what's happening, what's being held up, you're not seeing any of that because what you're measuring is here, right? Wow. So same thing, kind of in a very simplistic way. So if you're measuring free cortisol, great. And if you're doing a 4.5 point saliva to see what your nighttime and things of that cortisol doing, that sexy graph and stuff, that's great. But nothing about sex hormones, you're not going to get any value from it. So that throws saliva out in terms of hormones. Blood is good, but the problem is funny things happen when women go from healthy cycling creatures to perimenopause and menopausal creatures. So that's the rule of nature. This is not man versus woman type of thing. That's Mother Nature's rules, and there are reasons, hypotheses why this happens and why that transition happens, which we may get into the second discussion, the segment that you're going to talk about. Blood may or may not be an accurate prognostic marker clinically as to what's going on. So people take their estrogen dominance thing. We're taking the ratio of progesterone and estrogen via blood, and they somebody else takes a urine. They get very different results, and nobody can know what's going on. So there are reasons why that may be happening because of that transition. So you've got to understand biochemically and physiologically a woman's transition through that phase to be able to know which test to take or which parts of the test to take. Now, urine probably is one of the best because it's still not perfect, and I don't think it's anywhere near perfect as people think. The one that I've liked so far is the Dutch test. It's simple. Now I think they include a 4-point saliva test as well, so they can look at your sleep patterns and things of that sort. So with I don't know how much the saliva test costs these days. What is it, 200, $250 to do a saliva test? I think the Dutch test is similar to that. So you're going to get a lot more information out of that. Now, so why is urine so good? Because when hormones are metabolized, the body doesn't like to hang on to hormones. The body releases hormones in response to something because it wants the cell to do something. Something is happening here. I want a response here. The hormone's a good way to actually culminate that response fairly fast. And that response takes via genomic response. So it binds to DNA and triggers gene expression of certain genes, and those genes go do whatever they need to do.
Like when you're in a fight or flight mode?
Not necessarily. Anything that's happening. You and I are having this tea, having this conversation. The air is cooler today, or it's raining. All these things trigger all these changes simultaneously at all times. So, I lost my train of thought here.
Are you having brain fog?
I am, yeah, exactly. Menopause.
Okay, yeah. We're talking about urine tests.
So exactly. So the reason why urine is actually important because hormones don't like to hold on to, they don't live long in the body. So the body releases it within half an hour of binding. That's a half-life of a normal hormone. Within half an hour, it should be gone because it triggers a response, boom, done. Now I got to get rid of it. So time for, then you're sensitizing the body for the next response that comes through, right? So how do you get rid of it? So the body has to metabolize it. So the body churns this out, the tissue gets its response. Now I don't need it. So it sends it back to the liver. The liver has to metabolize it, neutralize it, then send it to the bowel or to the urine for it to be either defecated or urinated out. Okay, so all sorts of complicated things happen in these phases. Some people have genetic polymorphisms here and there, or they're nutritionally deficient here and there. That makes some of the phases of the neutralization go bizarre, and that's not a good thing. So you can look at that. So now you got something that's coming out of urine. So that's the end product of what that hormone has been doing. So you can basically get a snapshot of the life cycle of that hormone from urine. Right? What happened, you can predict where it was, what happened to it, and how much you made, and how is your, not just the hormones, how is your liver functioning? Because you can see how it's being metabolized. And is your kidney functional to basically produce this thing out? There are a lot of enzymes in the metabolic cycle of this hormone neutralization that are in the kidney, particularly for cortisol. So you can look at the complete cortisol pattern, not just the free cortisol. You know, how much total cortisol you're actually having, how much is it being metabolized, is the kidney being able, can it neutralize the rest of it? If it doesn't, is that enzyme insufficient or is inhibited? And sometimes you can look at nutrition to basically kickstart that process again. So you can look at all that from that urine panel of the Dutch test. Get a glimpse, clues, as you said. It's not a complete picture. You can't do that with saliva. There's no way you can do that. Blood, maybe, maybe not. But the problem with blood is you get something that's in systemic circulation already. So I'm already drawing something from you that's systemically circulating. It hasn't gone to the liver yet, may or may not have been processed yet, may or may not have, it definitely hasn't been excreted yet. So you can get an incomplete picture from blood too. But there are certain markers in blood that are sort of important to get that you cannot get from urine. One of which is the sex hormone binding globulin. These are the little beasts that the body makes because it doesn't like free hormones in the body. The body just doesn't make hormones and churns it out and say, go out and do whatever you need to do. The body is generally a water-soluble environment. We're 70–80% water. So that fat stuff, fatty steroid hormone is not going to stick around in water. It's going to want to be emulsified in something. And the sex hormone binding globulin is the stuff that binds to it. So out of 100 molecules that the body churns out in terms of any kind of hormone, whether estradiol, progesterone, actually estradiol or testosterone specifically, 99% of it, 98% of it is bound to this SHBG molecule. Only 2% is in free form. It's that potent. Hormones are that potent. So the body regulates its need. It produces, it's like basically drafting for an army. There's a war going on. So we're going to have hundreds of drafts going on all across the country, but not all of them are going to be deployed. So we bind them, we put them in, sequester them in something until we need. Only 1 or 2% get deployed to wherever, right? They do their work, they get excreted out, and the rest get deployed again. So, and the body, this is how it sort of keeps consistently checks on its hormones. Now, as I said, there are funny things that happen that can throw this off. So sometimes the Dutch can be off. It's an accurate test, but it may not reflect the symptomology that's going on. And sometimes if you simultaneously run a blood test and a urine test or a Dutch test, in one scenario, you may be thinking you're estrogen dominant if you go by ratios, whereas in the other test, it shows you completely normal or very abnormal, right? So which one's right?
So isn't it important that case, like who you have, who's interpreting it, who's behind, like looking at it?
Yes, exactly. So the interpretation is important because you need to be a detective, not you, but the practitioner that's in there needs to be. These tests are complex tests. I'm used to sort of looking at these kinds of numbers and these kinds of tests and sort of seeing the biochemical pattern, but most people are not.
Right.
And there's a lot more information you can glimpse from it. So it's important not to just get married to somebody being a functional practitioner or a conventional. I've seen a lot of actually conventional doctors that do a much better job than functional doctors, and vice versa. So we're at a cusp in healthcare. We're trying to figure out who we are. But in the middle of all this, we have science. You know, science gets driven by a very different covenant. We're in the pursuit of truth. We don't really care who's right or who's wrong. Science doesn't really care what you or I believe. It's data. Data drives what that hypothesis is true or not. So whether Dr. Joe is correct and Dr. Jane is incorrect, it has no bearing whatsoever in the conversation. So that's why Carol and I are actually sort of, I'm helping her with this program to bring that evidence base from my perspective. I'm not a clinician. I don't do any more health coaching for different kind of reasons, but bringing this perspective into making her programs evolve with the science is actually important, because a lot of people launch programs and they get married into that program for decades. And science moves at an everyday pace. Things change every day, and you want a program that evolves with the times and the evidence at hand. And that's actually more beneficial for you. So in terms of lab tests, that's basically what I wanted to discuss.
Perfect.
And sort of put you on the road. But I think in the next segment, if you want, we can drive into the biology, biochemistry of why things are shifting around.
Love that. I think that's super important. Okay, so from my perspective, it's a combination of going back to ancient wisdom and utilizing science, evidence-based data, scientific, unbiased science, to be able to help us figure out and utilize the ancient wisdom to get back to our balance. Because it's not about constantly chasing after our health. Once we're in balance, our bodies are innately able to keep in balance. That's what it's designed to do, to keep it in balance. But we need to have those tools. We need to be working with those tools. We need to get back to the basics. And there's a lot of little things that one can do that can help us. And everything in what I do has, like I've said, it's got to be practical, effective, and natural. All three of them. If it is practical and natural, but if it's not effective, what good does that do, right? Or if it's practical and effective, but not natural, then it's going to have a long-term side effects. I don't want that, right? Or if it's natural and effective, it's awesome. But if it's not practical, it's not going to be sustainable, right? We're living busy lives. None of us are going to be moving. I tried in one of the blue zones. That's just not practical. Or doing it in a way daily that is just doesn't feel right. It's like exhausting. You want it to be incorporating things in your life that's easy. I hope you enjoyed this information. If this resonates with you and you are in need of immediate support, feel free to schedule a 30-minute consultation with me, and we can figure out, we can do a personalized mini map for you to see where you are and where you need to be. So be sure to take advantage of that. Thank you. See you then.